A look through history to answer the sport's toughest questions. You're watching Revisionist MMA, powered by Fight Night Picks.
Hello and welcome to Revisionist MMA, a podcast where we look back and see what was missed or what should have maybe been looked at a little differently. The podcast will have an essential question, or more likely an unanswerable question, that we are trying to examine in the history of MMA. This week, the subject is recently retired double champ Daniel Cormier. I will look at Cormier's legacy with new addition to the Fightful MMA roster, former Bloody Elbow star Shakiel Mahjouri. Shakiel, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for that wonderful intro. It's nice to be on the other side of the introductions for once.
Well, you've earned it. All right, so let's talk about here's the big question, Shakiel, and I'll introduce this properly before I set you up with it. But the big question we're trying to figure out here is, how would Daniel Cormier's career have been different if he would have fought Brock Lesnar at UFC 200? Both fought at 200. Jon Jones fell out. So to engage in this discussion, we have to establish what they call in the Marvel universe or Star Wars universe as canon. Either that or we have to agree to suspend some disbelief. Daniel Cormier was scheduled to fight Jon Jones at UFC 200. So Cormier was training for 205 pounds. He made weight at 205 pounds. I guess the question I want to address first is, if Cormier, when he fought at 205 pounds, rehydrated, let's say, to 220. Let's give him 15. We'll say 225. Is that big enough to fight a juice to the gills Brock Lesnar, who ended up, having his fight overturned with Mark Hunt, but who had been out of the cage for 2 years? Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the level of risk in even taking the fight if you're Daniel Cormier. Dana White comes to you and says, hey, Jon Jones fell out. Anderson ain't happening, but I got Brock. No one cares about the Hunt fight. Do you want to fight Brock Lesnar tonight?
Wow.
What do you do if you're Cormier's camp? What do you do if you're Cormier?
Interesting. Like you said, I think the only real I think for DC, he was looking at that as an easy payday. It's like, Brock's been gone forever. Brock is probably going to have to rely on his wrestling. I would say for a fact that Daniel Cormier's striking is far superior to Lesnar's. But man, Brock's a freak in nature, and that's quite a bit of weight to give up. So I still think Daniel would get it done, but man, would the risks be higher. So
do you think he would have taken the fight?
What do you take in the fight?
If it was offered.
DC is so game, but he's so smart. He's a real company man. Oh, this is so hard. What was the Anderson Silva fight at all on the table at this point, or was it Brock Lesnar or bust for him?
Well, I remember. So the way it played out at 200 was, because he ended up ultimately fighting Anderson, was that Jones fell out and then Anderson kind of flew in to save the day. So I don't know that Brock was ever on the table. I think it was only ever Anderson.
Yeah.
But had they offered Brock instead of Anderson?
Okay, so Brock was the only other option. Man, if I were in DC's corner, I would say no, don't take that right now. I think DC would take it.
All right, so that's perfect, because that gives us the canon that we need. All right, so the risk has been accepted by Cormier's team, because honestly, Shakiel, if they don't, our discussion comes to a screeching halt right now. So I'm glad that you opted for Daniel to take it. So Cormier's team feels like at his best, Cormier is a better MMA wrestler and all-around fighter than Lesnar, and they don't think the weight difference is too much to overcome, so they take it. Now, the interesting thing about a guy like Brock is, doesn't matter how much time he's at. I used to have a joke with my friends where we would have this discussion of, at what age would you feel comfortable fighting Mike Tyson? How old does he have to be before you feel like he's no longer a threat? 60, 65, 70, right? So same thing with Brock Lesnar. When Brock Lesnar walks into a room, it doesn't matter how long he's been out of the sport. It doesn't matter the fact that he's doing the fake stuff. He's still an imposing guy, right? So I'll ask it flat out. And you touched on it earlier. Do you think Cormier could have beaten Brock Lesnar on short notice at UFC 200, obviously at heavyweight, because Brock ain't making light heavyweight? And if so, why?
Well, you see, the first thing I'm doing right now is, I was thinking about how good Cormier's striking was, but that was relative to like the recent Stipe fight. So I'm going back there right now. Prior to that, he fought Gustafsson and Johnson, and he almost got dropped by both of them. Or he did get dropped by both of them, if I'm not mistaken. It was a head kick by Johnson and an awesome knee. I think one of my favorite all-time knockdowns, because sorry to geek out for a second. Alexander Gustafsson had Cormier in the Muay Thai clinch, and as the knee came up, he let go of his hands so that all the impact would go through Cormier's skull instead of reverberating through his own hands and back into his own body. I honestly think the fight would suck, to be quite candid with you. I think Brock would lean very heavily on his wrestling. I don't think, especially early, he would be able to take Cormier down just based on Cormier's caliber of wrestling. Like, Brock Lesnar is a legit wrestler, NCAA wrestler. Don't take anything away from him, but I think what made his wrestling so effective and what made his whole UFC run so effective is the sheer ridiculous strength that he had. It's like, in terms of just overall power, it's him and Francis Ngannou, I think, in the heavyweight division in two very different ways, albeit. But I also don't think Brock Lesnar has the gas tank to really push that kind of pace long enough for his wrestling to be effective. So I think it'd be kind of a dud, but I would lean towards Cormier winning a decision, maybe taking rounds 3 to 5, but I think he'd very much be on the defensive for the first couple rounds.
Yeah, and you know, in fairness, I mean, I haven't watched DC's career as closely, and I'm the worst at remembering fights, but I think that he took a lot from Jones. Like, he seemed to be, at least later in his career, which we can go down a whole nother road with eye pokes and all that, but he seemed to be more of a hand fighter after he fought Jones in a way. You know, he was doing the thing where he kind of would put his hands out there and then snap a punch, whereas he was more of a traditional striker like Kane was earlier in his career. So it does get interesting, but I'm glad you took Cormier because, again, the conversation comes to screeching halt if you don't. All right, so now let's talk about Cormier's career and how it changes. This is kind of a sliding doors situation where you do one thing and it changes everything. So at the time of UFC 200, other relevant things to this next question that were happening was Stipe Miocic had just become heavyweight champion, knocking out Fabricio Verdum 2 months earlier. John Jones's future seemed unclear. He was denying allegations, but we kind of been down this road with him before. And Cain Velasquez fought on UFC 200 and knocked Travis Brown out in the first round. So with all those things kind of swirling, let's say it's an even more decisive win over Brock Lesnar.
Okay.
Does DC stay at light heavyweight and continue to defend his belt? Because he was the champion going in. Either with Jones in the division, you know, Ali kind of looking for his Frazier, or without him, or does he go to heavyweight?
He stays at light heavyweight. I think it's been very well documented that Cormier was not ever going to interfere with Cain Velasquez's heavyweight run. So considering Cain was on his little comeback, he just won over, he just beat Travis Brown. I don't suspect Cormier would have gone to heavyweight under any circumstance. Okay,
so then that is beautiful in terms of his legacy, because one of the things we're talking about here at the end is Daniel Cormier's complicated legacy. And I guess my question is, let's say his career goes as scheduled. You're right. He beats Brock, looks impressive, but it's a one-off. Back to light heavyweight and continues down the same road. He beat Rumble Johnson. Let's say he loses to Jones and it's still overturned. He beats Volkan Ozdemir. Then he jumps to heavyweight and fights Stipe. With the Brock Lesnar fight in his rear view, do you think he beats Stipe and shuts it down right there?
Beat Stipe in the first fight?
The very first time they fought. Do you think when he beat him for that belt, having already fought Brock at 200, he just...
I mean, I can't foresee things being any different. I think what Stipe is, and this is the thing, Stipe, I'd argue, overall has been caught in more fights than Daniel Cormier. I think, like you said, like we talked about in the bonus content, which you're going to love, is that Stipe's most masterful technique is his ability to make adjustments, not only fight to fight, but mid-fight. So I think Cormier would have still caught him with that sneaky, eye poke, whatever, but that sneaky shot off the clinch. So I don't suspect that would have changed whatsoever.
Right. But so if he picks up that win, is that a complete career for him? Is he Michael Strahan? Does he walk off? Is he...
Oh, interesting. I don't think so, only because at that time in his career, I think avenging the Jones loss was still a big priority for him. I think what happened with the Stipe Miocic fight is Stipe got his rematch and won, and now that put that sort of, I don't want to say sidetracked, but it definitely gave Cormier fuel beyond John Jones. So I think Stipe actually really helped Cormier move past John Jones, and I don't think he would have been done with that rivalry had the Stipe been a one-off fight.
Yeah, the weird thing about Cormier, and I guess he touched on this a little bit in the pre-fight, was that all this time, people have thought that John Jones is his big rival, but the old saying goes, it's not a rivalry till both guys win one.
Mm-hmm.
And then Stipe ended up being his true rival. And going into this third fight, I mean, that was going to be, I completely disagree with everyone who says, and a lot of this was coming from the ESPN folks and the UFC folks who work with Daniel Cormier. I am not of the belief that Daniel Cormier's legacy was in stone and that third fight didn't mean anything. I disagree with that completely. And so we could transition now into putting a bow on Daniel Cormier and talking about his legacy. We've had some fun here. Cormier's a Hall of Famer with a very complicated legacy. He never beat John Jones, even though there was some PED stuff and some picograms of it all that factored in. His crowning moments really were the Strikeforce Grand Prix, and which is for most people is enough, and that first fight with Stipe. But what ends up happening is he didn't win the trilogy with Stipe, and he didn't ever avenge the losses to Jones. So it gives him a very complicated legacy. I'm unsettled about Cormier's legacy. Can you give me some closure on DC and tell me why I have to put some more respect on his name?
Fair. I'm honestly on the side of the ESPN UFC folks. For me, the Miocic and the Jones fights were a big elevation to the career. But I think without, even with the Stipe losses and the Jones losses, I don't think you can deny that it's a Hall of Fame career. So how truly great is Daniel Cormier? Is he greater than John Jones? I don't think so. Is he greater than Stipe Miocic? Clearly not after 2 back-to-back losses. But I think when you look at his career arc and the list of people that he's beat and don't forget that second Jones fight, he was winning before the head kick. The second Stipe fight, he was winning before the finish. So even in his defeats, he's kind of like Alexander Gustafsson, but for all of MMA on 2 different divisions, right? Like even in defeat, he is generally super competitive. He has the Olympic background. He's got a phenomenal record, 22-3-0-1. And that stretch, Anthony Johnson, Anderson Silva, Alexander Gustafsson, Anthony Johnson a second time, Stipe Miocic, and Derek Lewis, that on its own, I think, is a Hall of Fame worthy run. Did he reach Mount Rushmore status? I don't think so. But is he one of the greatest heavyweights and one of the greatest light heavyweights of all time? I don't think there's any disputing that. I think he will beat just about any heavyweight in history that's not Stipe Miocic. So.
Yeah, I agree. I guess the only pushback that I would have to that would be, had he beat Stipe, would he then be on the Mount Rushmore? Would he then be
I think for sure. I think he for sure would be a Mount Rushmore fighter. I think of the upper weight divisions, he is around. Like if I'm trying to think of who the light heavyweight Mount Rushmore is, we got 4 names. So I guess not, just because you kind of have to pay respects to different eras. But if you look at the modern era of the UFC, I think he's one of the most successful fighters in this entire 2015 to 2020 run that we've had.
Yeah, he certainly is worthy of all the accolades he got. I don't know if let me ask you a question. He said that he's only gonna fight for titles. There's one that's vacated now at light heavyweight. Do you think he ever fights again? I feel like he kind of he tied his hands with that statement of, I don't want to fight after 40, and then the Brock thing fell through, and then Stipe won. What do you think?
I just don't see what's the point. Like, Daniel was very candid in his post-fight remark. Like, he released a statement the next day on Instagram and kind of, nodded to his journey in his retirement. And it's like, look, the Stipe Miocic trilogy, I understand. That was something, like, you had a chance to not only, the thing about winning that rematch, like, I don't know if he would have done it if, let's say, he was already thinking about retirement, Stipe won the first fight, and they offered him a rematch. I don't know if that would have been enough to entice him. I think it was the fact that beating Stipe a second time is not only a victory for one fight, but it means you're the better guy across 3 fights, right? Like, I think there's a lot of value to winning that trilogy. It means a lot more than having 1 win, 1 loss, or even 2 wins. I think if you have 3, if you win that trilogy, like, the stakes were so high at that point, I think that was real motivation for him. Like, why do you need another title? What is a title win over Dominic Reyes or Jan Blachowicz really going to mean for your career, right? Like, no one's denying that you're a heavyweight championship caliber fighter or a light heavyweight championship caliber fighter. You've won both the belts. The reason Stipe Miocic was enticing is because there was that opportunity to win the rubber match. The reason John Jones is enticing is because technically Jones only beat him once, right? And Cormier was super competitive in that fight. So I don't see a reason for him to fight. Like, if Brock Lesnar wants to do it, sure. I guess it's a weird freak show thing. It'd be cool and be a huge payday for him. But I don't think there's anything for him. There's anyone left for him to beat that's going to, at this point, really add stock to his legacy.
I'm with you. And I think the only way that we could see him, I like that you brought up Brock. I could see Daniel getting in shape for like UFC 300 and fighting Brock. Like something like that, where it's
when would UFC 300 be?
I don't even know, probably 2 or 3 years from now. He'd probably be way too old to do it, but Brock would be old too. So,
yeah.
It's interesting. The biggest point that you made there that I really appreciate is that I think that sometimes fans, I'm a huge fan of Chael Sonnen and his video content. And the reason why is just because he makes you think. It's why I like Rogan early on. You listen to somebody to make you think. One of the things that Chael has made me think about over the years is what are fighter motivations, right? And everybody that thinks that George St. Pierre won to fight Kamaru Usman, it's like, why go through all that just to win a belt you held for a bunch of years?
Exactly.
If you're ever going to see George St. Pierre again, guys, it's fighting Khabib for the 155-pound belt and being the first ever triple champ. That's when you're going to see him. And if you're ever going to see Conor again, it's going to be for Jorge Masvidal's BMF title, or it's going to be for Kamaru Usman's 170-pound title. These guys have made enough money. They've got enough accomplishments. There's certain things that are going to bring them out. And like you said, the things that would potentially bring DC out just don't exist.
Yeah.
He's not going to come out for, this guy that played in the World Series ain't coming out for the company softball game. Yeah. He's just not getting up for it. He's not excited about it. And that's how I see it with DC.
Do you think there's a chance, let's say Jones wins or loses the heavyweight title, do you think that would be enticing enough for Cormier? Because I'm thinking, I don't know about winning. I feel like actually if Jones wins, it'll be less motivating for Cormier. But what if Jones loses? It doesn't look all that great at heavyweight, and they offer Cormier a chance to fight him and avenge that loss.
You know what? Here's why I think that fight's never going to happen again.
I don't think
because
so either.
I don't think either fighter has anything to gain. Mm-hmm. Because if Cormier wins one, yes, he could say that Jones was dirty the first two, but he's only still got the one victory. Mm-hmm. And if Jones loses, then the reverse argument happens where then they could say, well, he was dirty the first two. No one has anything really. Everybody involved has more to lose than gain.
Okay, fair.
So that's why I think today, and you know what? I'm going to tell you this, Shakiel, and I believe this. And listen, fighting is as dysfunctional of a sport as you can follow, right? But I do think there's certain fighters that are too toxic for each other, and they need to just leave each other alone. I think Conor and Khabib are too toxic for each other, and what they bring to the fight week, they could generate with other guys on their own. They don't need, and it gets too messy. I do think that a little bit about Kobe and Tyron as well. And the John Jones and Daniel Cormier are just too toxic for each other. And maybe they just need to be out of each other's lives forever. And maybe they can exist better as – I think that – I think John Jones and Daniel Cormier should do? I think they should be at the desk for UFC. That's where they – like the Shaq and Charles, like let them argue like Uriah Faber and Dominic Cruz was another one they got. Cody and TJ. There's just guys.
Cody and TJ was gross.
It's too toxic,
Yeah, well, it's funny. Jones was like live tweeting during the Stipe Cormier fight, and he was actually very much in support of Cormier and speaking very highly of him. So it seems like Jones is doing his best actively to make amends and stay out of trouble, but some people just rub each other the wrong way, especially when competition is in play.
I think Jones respects Cormier as a man, but not really. Yeah. Like he would aspire to be Cormier as a man. All right, guys, there you have it. That was Revisionist History. Daniel Cormier. I'd like to thank Shakiel Mahjouri. Shakiel, tell folks where you can be followed, where your work can be found. Well, before you do that, I got to take this time to throw you some roses.
Please.
Here's the deal. Sometimes in MMA, especially the MMA media, you see a move that you didn't see coming, but when you see it, it makes perfect sense, right? Like I had a little bit of insight to like Mike Heck going to MMA fighting, and I was like, that's a perfect fit. When I saw you go to Fightful, and not only when I saw you go there, but when I started seeing the content, I was like, he came in the door like he'd been there for years. Like it was such a good match. It was such a great decision on your part. It was such a great decision on their part to bring you in. I love what you were doing at Bloody Elbow, but I just really like this this partnership. Just for a second, just talk a little bit about it, because I'm a big fan of your work, and I thought that was a great move going there.
Well, I appreciate that. Well, I got to thank a few people for that behind the scenes, of course. Sean Rossap, Fightful.com. Sean's just been so supportive right out the gate. He's like, he really wanted to focus on the pro wrestling end, so that's why they're looking for someone on the MMA end. And, he's basically just been from the moment I got there. He's like, if you're passionate about it, do it. And I've been fortunate. I know it's not always the case, but I've almost always had that experience in MMA. Same with Bloody Elbow. Once they immediately gave me a shot on anything I was passionate about, and once they saw that I could produce content that was up to par, they set me free. And Sean has been very great in doing that. For me, the move primarily was, let's hope this doesn't get back to ET Canada, but at the time, I was working full-time 40 hours a week for Entertainment Tonight Canada, and I would sneak in Bloody Elbow assignments when it was slow. And the move to Fightful was a chance to work in the MMA industry in a more full-time capacity. I'm still with ET Canada 3 days a week, but the rest of the week I'm doing as much as I can with Fightful. And so that was huge. And you know what? Aaron Bronstetter of TSN and James Lynch of everywhere that produces MMA content were really, really big helps in helping me get that and kind of walking me through the process of signing a long-term deal with a place. So it's been fun. And it's cool getting to work. Sometimes I think, Bloody Elbow is such a big platform, and Fightful, especially on the MMA end, is a much smaller network, but it offers me a real chance to just get in there and kind of make it my own and produce content. And, I just invested in a whole new computer setup that's going to be ready by next week. So I'm really excited to be able to start doing live streaming and more stuff like that. So it's been fun. Good nerves. And the team at Fightful has been so great and so hardworking and so supportive. And, I hope people are enjoying it. And I hope people will give me feedback and kind of stay along for the ride, because I really do want to make this fun. I don't want it to be just super played out, boring news. There's top 10 lists already. There's fight predictions. I just want it to be a place where people don't have to take MMA so seriously all the time.
Yeah, and I think that, the good thing about a guy like you is that you're kind of a Swiss Army knife in the sense that, you can run an MMA arm of a website all by yourself, because you just have a lot of things you bring to the table. And that's a very, I don't know, coded or cryptic way to say that you're a very talented guy. And I like I said, I appreciate your work. I like that you're able to do a lot of different things and bring a lot of things to the table. I certainly appreciate your time. Is there anything, where can folks follow you, and what's the thing you're most excited about right now?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for all the kind words. And I have to say, I loved doing this. The problem is I meet people like you, and I'm like, I wish I had come up with this idea first. It was really fun going through this alternate history of DC. Fight Shack Fight on Twitter. It's the best place to follow me. That's where you'll see all my work. FightfulMMA.com. The YouTube channel, youtube.com//FightfulMMA. Please follow that. We're doing our best to grow that. And yeah, just hit me up whenever. Let me know what's going on. Let me know what you guys would like to see from the channel. This is a really good opportunity to make an MMA platform by the fans for the fans. So.
And there you have it. The future of MMA Fightful, or Fightful MMA, is in great hands. All right, guys. Be sure and hit the comments, praise Shakiel, and blast me like you always do. Also, make sure to follow and subscribe to all the other Fight Night Picks content. Check out Early Stoppage when Craig and I return next week. He took a much-needed break and spent some time with his family, but we'll be back next week with Early Stoppage, the pardon and eruption of MMA. We'll see you next week. Peace.